So growing your best talent is all about a long-term strategy for filling the positions you have in the business, and maybe some positions you don't even know exist yet, with the right people. What I mean by right people is those people who have an actual ability, have the kind of competencies and drive and determination that might not have been established or demonstrated yet. So it's about being clever enough to realize where those people exist and where and how you could help yourself by picking them out, identifying it, and putting into action some form of plan to get that talent growing in the best way possible. It's not about databases, so this isn't about a system approach to this. This is about a very human, practical way of achieving that. And what we're going to do is create the conditions in which you can grow your best talent. Firstly, I'm going to share some related experience, then I'm going to go into a practical exercise. Just whilst I'm talking about the related experience, if you just go onto the Your Big Pick website, if you haven't already, go to the webinar page and download the one-page prop. What you can do when I'm going through the practical exercise, which I will as well, and I'll show you examples of, it just means you can follow along, because Big Picture is all about making and doing and the experience of working with others. And that might feel a bit odd because you're watching this, but actually we want to create that experience and give you a bit of an insight into that. Let's get started. Unrelated experience, been really timely me doing my prep this week, because there's been a number of really good references for growing your talent. I've been unpicking the Deloitte report, which is the Human Trends report about establishing a social enterprise that weighs up both profit making, revenue growth with the human aspects of what we all want as individuals now and in the future, and those expectations are changing massively. There's two elements of that, and the way the report is cut up, there's a rewire element, which is about doing the things you do now, but rewiring them in a different way. And then there's a more aggressive approach, which is more around talent mobility, and that's in the recode part. That means doing things differently. So if we look at accessing talent first, that's about internal mobility. That's about giving people the chance to not have to leave the business to develop themselves, but actually stay with the business and actually find other opportunities within that business to prosper. Accessing talent in new ways, so not necessarily employees, but contracting for that talent differently to ensure that that value is shared in a fair and equitable way. So there's different ways to access that talent. There might be good aspects of somebody's ability that isn't necessarily best delivered through the way that they are contracted and engaged with now. And it's all about that and the alternative workforce, or the whole range of different ways people can contract. So that was one of my observations, that actually there's some really current, deep analysis of this area around talent. Such a big thing because it costs so much for recruitment, etc. And the right kind of people might be under your nose, but not, you might not actually realize it. Moving on to the recode part, which is more aggressive. It's about the internal career market. Are you giving people that internal career path? And it's easier to leave, as mentioned earlier, easier to leave than it is to stay. And that can't be right. I think 50% of respondents said it was easy to leave a job and go into a new one in terms of developing their talents. And it's about providing options. So is your business, or the business you care about, the business you're involved with, actually doing enough to provide options? And that's what the Deloitte report tells me. So there's two aspects there in terms of the future of HR and how it has to change that we should really be looking at closely. And there was another one, another reference this week around the HRD email that I've got a kind of subscription to. And I noticed that, well, there were three elements of that, but two I liked more than the other one. One was about diversifying recognition. So that was acknowledging, it was a bit of working out really that I didn't think was as relevant, certainly not as the first point, which is that recognition can come in a kind of day-to-day form, informal and then formal. We probably think of recognition in the latter of those three, but actually there's different ways up the chain and more directly that recognition can be given to people who, you know, talent's a broad church, could be doing many different things. The second and third is interesting, which we're going to pick up on a theme today as we work through, which is using data to analyze outcomes. And I think a little bit disappointed in that, really, only because I think growing talent is a very human kind of approach and objective, and actually data is sometimes quite cold. So I think done in the right way can back up an argument and observations, but it probably shouldn't drive it, because I think things can get lost in the data, and that's not necessarily the kind of conversation you want to promote. And adopting a growth mindset. So this is a big one. So this is about setting an expectation. Just because a person is working in a particular role, does that mean that that person has to stay in that role for the foreseeable future, or actually could they get up and move to somewhere else in the business and prosper and actually benefit themselves, the team and the organization that they're working for? So those are kind of the references that have come to me this week. We're going to develop that theme a little bit. My personal reference, I'm going to take it down a level to my personal experience. It's about 3 parts to this. We're going to do the power of 3 all the way through this. That's 3. The 3 are understanding your people. So that is your people underlined, the person, the individual. How do we engage with them to get away from the generic statistics and the averages? How do you actually find out what that person is thinking? Whether you think they're talented or not, what are we doing to listen to their voice and their story? And I'm going to go into how I do that with Big Picture, and practitioners of Big Picture are doing that all over the place to actually find out what that individual is thinking, what they're doing, how happy they are, what their challenges are, and where their opportunities are. I think the second part of this, in my experience, is understanding the business. So understanding it from an individual's perspective is one thing. How does that sit in the business? And you can see from this backdrop here, we kind of specialize in this Big Picture. We have kind of isolated the key elements of the business, but in a way that everybody can access and engage with, and actually help themselves to be made more vocal, more interested, and more interesting in terms of the business conversation that's going on around them. And then I think once you understand your people and you understand your business, you can then smash some assumptions. It all comes together. And we're back to that reference earlier to say growth mindset suggests if you understand the individual, you understand the business, then there's a potential to spot opportunities to grow that talent, and not always in the area of the business that they're from. And I think only by broadening out the view across the whole business can you actually seek to take advantage of that. And I think that's where we're missing a trick in terms of growing your talent. So we're going to get into practical exercise now. Again, there's going to be 3 parts to it. I've got my own notes. I want you to follow along. So if you haven't already, just pause and go onto the Your Big Pig webinar page and get hold of the prop. I want you to get it in front of you. We're going to be talking about a business here which I'm going to ask you to follow along with, and they provide fine wines. Nice little subject topic, if that's your thing. And we're going to be talking through a little scenario that happened in a room. I've changed the kind of names, but actually it's based on a real scenario where one gentleman was particularly good at something, but it wasn't actually being appreciated by the team, the wider team. People who worked with him understood, but the wider team didn't. So I'm just going to get started. What I'd like you to do in front of you is just make a note that it's Wines Corporation is the name of the company, so put that in the top left. And at the top of the prop, you'll see there's a little green area, and it's about putting the purpose of the business. We're not going to go into detail on this today because it's not the subject of this session, but actually if you just put in there as the purpose, they provide fine wines as the purpose. And if we had time, we'd probably go into a bit of detail about the different core values of the business, but we'll just leave it there for now. Okay, so I want you to imagine you're in the place of one of the employees who works within the factory area of the wine provider. And if you notice from the prop, there are 3 boxes at the center. And what we do, it's a simplified form of the template, just for the purposes of running these kind of sessions. What I'd like you to do is just take your pen and run it across the page from left to right, and that's across the yellow line, and that's the customer journey. In big picture terms, the yellow symbol is the customer. So you'll see immediately you've got a sense of the customer journey running from left to right. And because we're speaking to this guy who works within operations or the factory, it's the center part of the page that I'd like you to focus on. And by focusing, what I mean is if you just note at the top that he works at the factory, so where it says operations, right over the top, factory. And then because we're dealing with this part of the template, I always encourage people who are playing along to box off that part of the template. It just shows that you're active in that area and you've given it some consideration. Forms like a bit of a gap analysis for those areas that you haven't worked on. Now, you've got some symbols down the left-hand side. What I'd like you to do is to cut them out or tear them off. And I'd like you to use and think about the red symbol. The red symbol is a team. So in this case, it would represent this gentleman. We're going to call him Jack. Jack works in the factory. So plonk Jack and the red symbol somewhere in the center part of the page where you've put the factory box. And one of the challenges that Jack raised when we were going through big picture with him is that he doesn't get enough people time. So he's a real people person, but sometimes in the factory, he doesn't get the chance to kind of show that off. And we have a symbol within big picture, which is a challenge symbol. So whenever there's a kind of resistance or something that's not quite working as well and something we can actually develop and turn into an opportunity, we represent that as a challenge. So you've got a challenge symbol, which is the triangle with it's like a hazard sign with a little exclamation mark on it. So I'm just going to give you a little moment to reflect and just see how you would make that record of what I've said using the prop in front of you. And I'm just going to leave you for a minute to have a little reflect on that. If you'd like a bit more time, just pause the video. Okay. If you're ready to proceed, then what I'm going to do is share with you what I have on my screen. Here we go. So this is what I've recorded. You should be able to see my notes here. So I've got, going from top left, we've got Wines Corp. At the top, I've got providing fine wine. And I've noted that Jack works in the factory. I haven't actually written Jack's name on this one, but that red symbol there is Jack. And we've noted that he's got a challenge that not enough people time. And that's based on the fact he has some real talent around dealing with people. Everyone recognizes that. He, in fact, knows it because he's always been that way. People around him notice it, but actually his talent for this is not being fully utilized in the business. So what I'm going to move on to a little bit, if you want to kind of just have a look at what you've got in comparison and compare it. Remember, there's no right or wrong answer to this. Big picture is all about giving people a chance to express themselves. And because of that, you rarely get two people looking at something the same. But what you do get is a good contrast. And you actually get to find out what people are thinking. Just going to develop that on a little bit. The conversation with Jack went along the lines of, he works in the team, he develops good relationships, and feedback is that, the feedback with Jack is that he develops great relationships, and actually that's measured when they get the customer feedback. Is actually pointed out that whenever there has been a kind of physical delivery and somebody goes to the factory, customer goes to the factory, they always end up having a good chat with Jack. He always helps them out, etc. So there's a measure there around feedback. So the symbol that you've got is the black symbol with the white cross on it. And just bring that one on, and somewhere where you think appropriate, remembering the yellow line is the customer, just place the measure symbol somewhere where you think is appropriate. I'll just leave you with a second to do that. Okay. Again, we've got the challenge symbol in play. So basically at this point, we've got the team symbol, the measure symbol, and the challenge symbol all in play. And the way the conversation goes with big picture, because it follows a path, of 6 symbols plus then the challenge and the opportunities. Once we've got a challenge in play, we can develop the conversation onto what the opportunity is that's presented. So I'm just going to share with you what I had when I continued this on. So you can see there, I've just shared, which is, it's developed a little bit, not a load of new information by any respect, but what it has done is move the symbols around a little bit. Now, when you're using the big picture kit, they stick on the page, or if you're using one of the mag boards, the poker chips are kind of there and are presented as things that you can move around. So moving things around and not knowing the right answers to start with is absolutely all part of the big picture approach. So things develop. It's not so much showing on my notes here, but you might find yourself combining symbols together or overlapping them in somewhere. And that always happens, and that's a really good insight, because that's very natural for a person to do that without even realizing it. As an example, how close does Jack put himself towards the customer journey? Does he see himself truly in the back room, and he never contacts the customer or never has an influence on the customer? If he was pointing out or describing one of his team, would they be closer to the customer journey? So that's always a good measure of how he sees himself in the team. But at this point, all we've recognized in terms of growing your talent, we're talking to an individual here who has a particular talent in a certain area. We've identified a challenge which he has, it pointed out, but he's done it in an environment we can do something with. So he might be in a one-to-one, but more likely is in a small group as part of a bigger group, and we're working through a big picture workshop. This is very typical of what we do with big picture. If everybody would have a chance to contribute, but then at the front we'd have a board where all the stuff comes together. If you want a bit more time to reflect, please just pause the video and we'll just go back into the next day. So we're just moving through, we're about halfway through now, the practical exercise. So where do we take this? Well, the way the conversation went in brief terms is that, yes, there are other areas of the business. And if you remember my introduction, at this point, we've understood a bit about Jack. He's shared what he thinks, and if he said a load of rubbish, then probably his colleagues would tell him so, but he didn't, and everyone pretty much recognized the view that Jack expressed was true. So not only for him, but in a group environment, what you can then do is say, well, we understand about the individual. If you remember my introduction, is what about the business? What do we understand about the business? To set a kind of wider context to ensure that we can turn that challenge into an opportunity, but not necessarily in the area of the business where Jack currently works. Now, of course, we know that different roles within a business require different skill sets, and I'm going to oversimplify things massively here by taking a view that Jack talks so passionately, he understands the product, he's been there a while. Why not deploy and use some of Jack's skills within the marketing team? Not necessarily in a direct sales role and not necessarily full-time, but what does Jack know that the customers like so much that we could take and utilize and deploy in the marketing team? So just on the prop in front of you, if you could move the symbols around and maybe make some of your own notes. You've really just got about half the symbols, but just use the ones that you've got, the team, the measure, maybe the opportunity. Maybe leave the challenge where it is and just focus on those first 3. And I'm just going to give you a moment to have a think about, with the prop in front of you, how you might express a view to be validated of where Jack's talent could be grown and developed within the business. Okay, I'm going to restart, but do pause if you want a bit more time. I'm just going to show you with what I've got. Please compare with yours. So what I've done, back to that point about the gap analysis, I've now explored the marketing area. This is a slimmed down version of the template, but it just does give you an insight into how BigPick works. So what we're saying is here is, why don't we take Jack's knowledge and way of dealing with people, and in some way introduce an element of Jack into the marketing, which on a separate conversation might be facing its own challenges. We've not really gone into that, but what Big Picture does really well in kind of systems thinking method is that it will join together two things. So if we see a challenge in marketing and we see an opportunity in another part of the business, it's really good to try and work out how the two can help each other. And or sometimes there's like a reciprocal piece going on, but not enough time for that. We're just going to simplify it down. Why not use some of Jack's skills? So what we'd go into is, well, how do we do that? And you can see just below on your prop, you've got the list of opportunities there. And that's when you get pretty close to like an action list or an output for the Big Picture workshop, because whilst at the center of the page you've got a kind of mind map kind of approach, actually sometimes you need to bring it right down into that opportunities list on the left hand side. So hopefully you're following along. Remember, there's not a right and wrong answer to this, and if you've got something different to me or you've noted something in a different way, then that's absolutely fine. What we would do is use that as a device to have a good conversation. It's all about sharing useful truths. So as long as what you're saying is true, and I hoped it would be, I would hope it's useful, because the truth is always useful in respect, and providing you're sharing that and you're getting it down on the page, that then becomes the backdrop for a really good conversation. We're now moving into the end part of the exercise, or the last part. What I would say to you is, although I've not given you all of the symbols, because it's just a simplified prop, two of the other symbols within Big Picture that you've not seen or talked about yet is the process and the system symbol. So we've got a process, black rectangle, and a blue technology symbol. And to join that up with the team symbol, what I would say to you, and I would encourage us to think as a group about this, is what kind of process, people, and system support would further develop that talent, not only in where Jack works now in the factory, but potentially in marketing, but also in another part of the business. And whilst I just leave that thought hanging, I will show you what I mean by that. So here we have, and fair enough, I brought in some of the poker chips, which is a kind of different Big Picture product, but what I brought in is, I just want to leave that hanging as a thought, that we've gone very much, if we go back to the introduction, from understanding your people, which is in this case Jack, but of course it could be anybody in any kind of business. We then took that and we understood sufficiently about the business to be able to identify an opportunity in the marketing area. And of course, depending on which talent has been spotted and what the voice is and what the observation is, of course, it could go off in lots of different directions. But just for this scenario, we go to marketing, and then what we do is we use the other Big Picture symbols, which you can see on the backdrop behind me. We use the other Big Picture symbols to promote and provoke, here they are, provoke and promote a conversation about people, process, and systems. And therefore you think, well, how have we managed to go up and down and left and right? It's because give people a reasonable framework in which to operate, isolate the right elements in the form of the symbols. And what Brain and we like to do pretty much naturally without really thinking a lot about it is to try and piece them together and make connections. So at this point, this is where the exercise stops. Hopefully you'll have some notes in front of you, and if you have, please do share them with me at Your Big Pick on one of the various channels. I would love to pick up and compare and contrast. You might have a challenge, which I'd love to kind of talk to you about. To remind you what Big Picture's all about, we sell these kits, the kind of workshop kits, the activity kits, the meeting kits, where we basically have the same approach in different forms to suit different environments. We sell the kits, we weave them into workshops, we can facilitate them, or we can teach you to do that yourself. We run open workshops, or we go into companies and run workshops for them as a kind of team event. And if you were to piece something onto the workshop, that then becomes potentially a program for which we specialize in people development programs and business development programs. And that's what this session is about. I hope you've got something from that. I've actually quite enjoyed going through it. It makes sense to me, obviously, because I've done a bit of research and worked it through and got some experience in this. Might be totally new to you, might be parts you don't understand, in which case contact me. And I'll leave it there, but thanks for watching.